I tried to fight it. I told myself she was just another woman, just another fleeting attraction. But every time I saw her, my chest tightened, my body ached, and my thoughts betrayed me. She slipped into my every silence, filled my every emptiness. I wanted her in ways I couldn't control, and the truth was simple: I could not stop wanting her. The first time I saw Joan, I forgot how to breathe. It was a Tuesday morning in advanced psychology, and I was settling into my usual seat in the back row when she walked in. Tall, athletic, with shoulders that spoke of hours spent in the gym and an easy confidence that made my stomach flip. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, a few strands escaping to frame her face, and when she laughed at something her friend said, the sound went straight through me like electricity. I tried to focus on Professor Williams' droning about cognitive behavioral theory, but my eyes kept drifting to the curve of Joan's neck, the way she absently twirled her pen between her fingers, how she leaned forward when she was concentrating. There was something magnetic about her presence that pulled at me relentlessly. I'd never felt anything like this before. Sure, I'd had crushes, but this was different. This was hunger. Raw, aching want that settled deep in my chest and refused to leave. After class, I lingered, pretending to organize my notes while stealing glances at her. She gathered her things with unhurried movements, every gesture graceful and deliberate. When she stretched, her shirt rode up slightly, revealing a strip of tan skin that made my mouth go dry. I followed her path out of the classroom at a distance, memorizing the way she moved through the world like she owned it. Confident. Unafraid. Everything I wasn't. That night, I lay in bed replaying every moment. The way she'd raised her hand to answer a question, how her voice was deeper than I'd expected, the small scar above her left eyebrow that I wanted to trace with my fingertip. I imagined what her skin might taste like, what sounds she might make if I kissed that sensitive spot just below her ear. The thoughts came unbidden and intense, sending heat coursing through my body. I pressed my face into my pillow, trying to push away the images flooding my mind, but they persisted. Joan's hands on my skin, her mouth on mine, the weight of her body pressing me into the mattress. I'd never wanted anyone this desperately before, and it terrified me. The next few weeks became a careful dance of observation and avoidance. I learned her schedule, knew which routes she took across campus, what time she grabbed lunch. I positioned myself where I could see her without being obvious about it, drinking in every detail like I was dying of thirst. She had this habit of running her tongue across her bottom lip when she was thinking, and it drove me absolutely wild. During lectures, I'd watch her do it and lose track of everything else, my pen frozen in my hand as heat pooled low in my belly. I started having dreams about her. Vivid, sensual dreams that left me gasping awake in the early morning hours, my body aching with need. In my dreams, she touched me with those strong hands, whispered my name against my throat, made me come apart with a tenderness that felt almost reverent. I'd wake up wanting her so badly it was like a physical ache, and the shame would follow immediately after. What was wrong with me? I barely knew this woman, had never even had a real conversation with her, yet I was consumed by fantasies of her body against mine. During the day, I tried to distract myself. I threw myself into my studies, picked up extra shifts at the campus bookstore, even attempted to go on a date with Marcus from my research methods class. But nothing worked. Joan had gotten under my skin, into my bloodstream, and I couldn't shake her loose. The worst part was how my body betrayed me whenever she was near. If she walked into a room, my pulse would spike and my palms would grow damp. If she happened to sit close to me, I could smell her perfume, something warm and woodsy that made me want to press my face against her neck and breathe her in. There was one particular afternoon when she dropped her textbook right in front of me. As she bent to pick it up, I caught a glimpse down her shirt and saw the edge of a black lace bra. The image seared itself into my brain, and I spent the rest of class clenching my thighs together, trying to ignore the persistent throb between my legs. I became an expert at reading her moods from across a room. When she was frustrated, she'd tap her fingers against her thigh in a specific rhythm. When she was amused, one corner of her mouth would quirk up before she allowed herself to smile. When she was tired, she'd massage the back of her neck with those long, elegant fingers that featured prominently in my increasingly elaborate fantasies. I memorized the sound of her laugh, bright and infectious when she was genuinely delighted, softer and more intimate when something struck her as privately funny. I noticed that she preferred pens to pencils, always chose seats near windows, and had a tiny freckle on her left wrist that I wanted to kiss. The basketball season started in November, and I discovered Joan was on the team. I'd never cared about sports before, but suddenly I found myself at every home game, sitting in the stands with my heart hammering as I watched her play. She was magnificent on the court. All controlled power and fluid motion, her body moving with an athletic grace that left me breathless. When she scored, she'd flash this triumphant grin that made my knees weak. When she was fouled, the competitive fire in her eyes was so intense it sent shivers down my spine. I loved watching her hands grip the ball, the way her muscles flexed as she dribbled, how her shirt clung to her body when she was sweating. There was something primal about seeing her in her element, all raw strength and determination, that awakened something equally primal in me. One particular game against our rival school, Joan was having an exceptional night. She'd already scored 18 points, her teammates feeding her the ball every chance they got. The crowd was electric, chanting her name, but all I could focus on was the sheen of sweat on her skin and the fierce concentration etched across her features. With 2 minutes left on the clock, she stole the ball and drove down the court, her movements fluid and powerful. As she went up for the shot, our eyes met across the gymnasium. For a heartbeat that felt like an eternity, everything else faded away. The crowd, the noise, the game itself, none of it mattered. There was only Joan, suspended in midair, looking directly at me with an intensity that made my entire body flush with heat. The ball swished through the net, but she was still looking at me as she landed. Still looking at me as her teammates swarmed her in celebration. Still looking at me as the final buzzer sounded and the crowd erupted around us. I should have left then. Should have gathered my things and hurried out like I always did, content to worship her from afar. But something about that look, about the way she'd found me in a sea of faces, kept me frozen in place. She said something to her teammates and started walking toward the stands. Toward me. My heart was beating so hard, I was sure everyone could hear it over the celebration. She climbed the bleachers with that same athletic grace, never breaking eye contact, until she was standing right in front of me. "You come to a lot of games," she said, and her voice was slightly breathless from exertion. There was sweat beading on her forehead, and I had to clench my hands to keep from reaching out to touch her face. Yes, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're incredible to watch." Something shifted in her expression, a flash of something I couldn't quite identify. Surprise? Pleasure? Before I could analyze it further, she was extending her hand to me. "I'm Joan," she said, as if I didn't already know her name, didn't already know everything about her that could be observed from a distance. "Charlie," I replied, placing my hand in hers. Her skin was warm and slightly calloused from the basketball, and the contact sent electricity shooting up my arm. I wondered if she could feel it too, this current that seemed to arc between us. "Charlie," she repeated, and the way she said my name made my stomach flutter. "I've noticed you in psychology class. You sit in the back." She'd noticed me. The thought made me dizzy with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. How long had she been aware of my presence? What else had she observed? "I like the back row," I said lamely, then immediately felt foolish. "Better view of everything." Joan's lips curved into a smile that made my breath catch. Everything. The word hung between us, loaded with implications I wasn't sure I was ready to acknowledge. Around us, the gymnasium was starting to empty, but we remained locked in our bubble of tension and possibility. I should let you get back to your team, I said finally, though every part of me screamed to stay, to keep talking, to figure out what was happening between us. Yeah, she agreed, but she didn't move away. If anything, she seemed to lean slightly closer, and I caught another hint of her scent beneath the clean smell of sweat. But Charlie, yes, I hope you'll be at our next game. It wasn't a question, and the certainty in her voice made something warm unfurl in my chest. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and she smiled again before jogging back down to the court. I sat there long after she'd disappeared into the locker room, my hand still tingling from her touch, replaying our brief conversation over and over. She'd noticed me. She wanted me at the next game. The knowledge was intoxicating and overwhelming. Walking back to my dorm that night, I felt like I was floating. Every nerve ending was hyper-aware, every sensation heightened. The cool night air felt like a caress against my skin, and I found myself imagining it was Joan's breath instead. That night, my dreams were more vivid than ever. Joan's hands mapping the landscape of my body, her mouth leaving trails of fire wherever she kissed me. I dreamed of telling her how I felt, of her confession that she'd been watching me too, wanting me too. I dreamed of her taking me apart with a gentleness that bordered on worship, and I woke up gasping her name. The days between that game and the next felt endless. I analyzed our interaction from every possible angle, reading meaning into every word, every gesture. The way she'd said my name, how she'd lingered before leaving, the intensity of her gaze when she'd looked at me from the court. I found myself paying even more attention to her in class, if that was possible. Now when she ran her tongue across her lip, I wondered if she was thinking about kissing me. When she stretched and I caught glimpses of her skin, I imagined tracing those same lines with my mouth. The sexual tension was becoming unbearable. I was constantly aroused, constantly on edge, my body humming with a need I'd never experienced before. Simple things, the brush of fabric against my skin, the vibration of my phone, could send unexpected jolts of pleasure through me because everything reminded me of Joan. I started masturbating more frequently, my fantasies growing more elaborate and intense. I imagined her touching me everywhere, kissing me until I couldn't think straight, making me beg for release. I pictured myself exploring her body with the same desperate hunger I felt during our brief encounter, learning what made her gasp and moan and arch beneath me. But even the most intense orgasms couldn't satisfy the deeper craving. I didn't just want her body. Though God, did I want her body? I wanted to know her thoughts, her fears, her dreams. I wanted to make her laugh and comfort her when she cried. I wanted to wake up next to her and fall asleep in her arms. The realization that I was falling in love with someone I barely knew should have scared me more than it did. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Like every moment of my life had been leading me toward Joan, toward this overwhelming feeling that threatened to consume me entirely. As the next game approached, my anxiety reached fever pitch. What if she'd forgotten about me? What if that moment between us had meant nothing to her? What if I'd imagined the whole thing? But then I'd remember the way she'd looked at me, the certainty in her voice when she'd asked me to come, and I'd allow myself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, this beautiful woman who'd haunted my every waking moment felt even a fraction of what I felt for her. The night before the game, I stood in front of my mirror trying on different outfits, wanting to look perfect for her. I settled on jeans that hugged my curves and a sweater that brought out my eyes, then immediately second-guessed myself. Was I trying too hard? Not hard enough? I barely slept that night, my mind racing with possibilities and fears in equal measure. Tomorrow, I'd see her again. Tomorrow, maybe I'd find the courage to tell her how I felt. Or maybe I'd chicken out and spend another few weeks drowning in silent longing. Either way, I knew my life was about to change. Joan had awakened something in me that couldn't be put back to sleep, a hunger that demanded to be fed. I just had to find the courage to let her know how much I wanted her to be the one to feed it. The gymnasium was packed for the next game, but I felt like Joan and I were the only two people in the building. Every time she glanced toward the stands, my heart stuttered. During warm-ups, she caught my eye and winked, a small gesture that sent heat spiraling through my entire body. She played even better than usual that night, if such a thing was possible. Every move was poetry in motion, every shot perfectly calculated. But what struck me most was how she seemed to be playing for me, glancing over after particularly impressive plays with a look that said, "Did you see that?" I saw everything. The graceful arc of her body as she shot three-pointers. The way she commanded the court, directing her teammates with quiet authority. How her jersey clung to her back when she was sweating, the fabric dark with moisture. The fierce joy on her face when they took the lead in the fourth quarter. When the final buzzer sounded, another victory, I expected her to celebrate with her team like she always did. Instead, she jogged straight over to where I was sitting, her chest heaving from exertion, her skin glowing with a sheen of sweat that made her look like some sort of athletic goddess. "Good game," I said, though the words felt inadequate for what I'd just witnessed. "Thanks for coming," she replied, and there was something in her voice, something softer than I'd heard before. "Walk with me." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and followed her out of the gymnasium. We walked in silence across campus, the cool night air a sharp contrast to the heated atmosphere we'd left behind. I was hyper-aware of her presence beside me, the sound of her breathing, the way our steps had naturally fallen into sync. "You know," she said suddenly, "I was hoping you'd be there tonight." My heart skipped. "Really?" "Really." She stopped walking and turned to face me, her eyes intense in the lamplight. "Charlie, can I ask you something?" I nodded, afraid to speak. "Why do you sit so far away in class? You always choose the back row, even when there are closer seats available." The question caught me off guard. How could I explain that I sat in the back because it gave me the best view of her? That I'd memorized the exact shade of her hair in different lighting, the way she bit her lip when she was concentrating? "I like to observe," I said finally, which was true enough. "Observe what?" "You," I thought. "Always you. Everything. People. The way they interact, the way they move through space." Joan stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her again, sweat, and something uniquely her that made my head spin. "And what have you observed about me?" The question hung between us like a challenge. I could feel my face burning, but there was something in her expression that made me want to be honest. Recklessly, completely honest. "I've observed that you're beautiful," I whispered. "And strong. And that you have this way of commanding attention without even trying. I've observed that you make me forget how to think clearly." Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment I thought I'd said too much. Then she was smiling, that same devastating smile that had been haunting my dreams. "Charlie," she said softly, and my name on her lips sounded like a prayer. "I've been hoping you'd notice me too." The world tilted. "You have. For weeks. You think you're invisible in that back row, but you're not. Not to me." She reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, her fingertips grazing my skin and sending shivers down my spine. "I've been trying to work up the courage to talk to you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Joan, gorgeous, confident Joan, had been nervous about talking to me? "You could have just said hello," I managed. "Could I have?" She laughed, but there was vulnerability in it. "You always seemed so focused, so intense. I wasn't sure you'd want to be bothered." If only she knew how desperately I'd wanted to be bothered by her. How I'd imagined her approaching me in class, asking for my notes, any excuse for contact. "I would have wanted that," I said. "I would have wanted that very much." Something shifted in the air between us, the tension ratcheting up to an almost unbearable level. We were standing so close now that I could count her eyelashes, could see the way her pupils had dilated in the dim light. "Charlie," she said again, and this time my name sounded different. "Hungrier. What are you doing tomorrow night?" "Nothing," I said immediately, though I had no idea what day tomorrow even was. Time had become irrelevant. Would you like to come over? I could cook dinner, we could talk more. The invitation hung between us, loaded with possibility. I knew if I said yes, there would be no going back. Whatever was building between us would reach its inevitable conclusion, and I'd finally have to confront the depth of my desire for her. Yes, I breathed. Yes, I'd like that very much. Her smile was radiant. Good. Here, give me your phone. I handed it over with trembling fingers, watching as she typed in her number. When she handed it back, our fingers brushed, and the contact sent electricity shooting up my arm. Text me, she said. I'll send you my address. I nodded, still not quite believing this was really happening. Joan wanted to see me. Joan had been thinking about me. Joan was looking at me like she wanted to devour me whole. I should let you get some sleep, she said, though she made no move to leave. Big game tonight probably tired you out. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. I was more wired than I'd ever been in my life, every nerve ending singing with anticipation. Sleep was the last thing on my mind. Joan, I said as she started to turn away. Yeah, thank you for noticing me. Her expression softened, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of something vulnerable beneath her confident exterior. Thank you for being worth noticing. Then she was walking away, and I was left standing under the lamppost, clutching my phone and trying to process what had just happened. Joan wanted to see me tomorrow. Joan had been watching me, thinking about me, working up the courage to approach me. I walked back to my dorm in a daze, my body humming with anticipation and arousal. Every step sent little shockwaves through me, and by the time I reached my room, I was practically vibrating with need. I fell onto my bed and immediately reached for my phone, typing out a dozen different text messages before deleting them all. What did you say to someone who'd just turned your world upside down? How did you express the magnitude of your want without scaring them away? Finally, I settled on something simple. Thank you for tonight. Can't wait for tomorrow. Her response came almost immediately. Sweet dreams, Charlie. See you soon. Sweet dreams. As if sleep was possible when my entire body was on fire with wanting her. I pressed the phone to my chest and closed my eyes, allowing myself to imagine what tomorrow night might bring. I pictured walking into her apartment, the nervous energy crackling between us as she offered me wine. I imagined sitting on her couch, close enough to touch, the conversation gradually becoming more intimate. I fantasized about the moment when talking would no longer be enough, when one of us would finally bridge the gap and press our lips together. The thought made me gasp aloud, my back arching off the bed as arousal flooded through me. I slipped my hand beneath my pajama bottoms, already wet and aching, and imagined it was Joan's hand instead. Joan's fingers sliding through my wetness, Joan's mouth on my neck, Joan's voice whispering my name as she touched me. I came harder than I ever had before, Joan's name spilling from my lips as waves of pleasure crashed over me. But even as I lay there trembling and breathless, I knew it wasn't enough. It would never be enough until it was really her hands on my body, her mouth claiming mine, her weight pressing me into the mattress as she made me forget everything but the feel of her skin against mine. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. I spent the entire next day in a state of barely controlled anticipation. Every hour felt like an eternity, each minute crawling by with agonizing slowness. I changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on a sundress that skimmed my thighs and made me feel feminine and desirable. By the time evening arrived, my nerves were frayed to the breaking point. I stood outside Joan's apartment building, checking my reflection in the glass doors for the 100th time, trying to calm my racing heart. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor, and each step up felt monumental. When I finally reached her door, I stood there for a long moment, gathering my courage. From inside, I could hear soft music playing and the sound of something sizzling in a pan. I knocked, and the sounds immediately stopped. A moment later, the door opened and Joan appeared, and I forgot how to breathe all over again. She was wearing a simple black dress that hugged her curves in all the right places, her hair loose around her shoulders. She'd put on makeup, just enough to enhance her natural beauty, and when she smiled at me, I felt my knees go weak. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," I managed, my voice barely audible. "Come in." She stepped aside, and I entered her space for the first time. The apartment was small but cozy, decorated with plants and photographs that spoke of a life well lived. It smelled like her perfume and whatever delicious things she'd been cooking. "You look beautiful," she said as she closed the door behind me, and the compliment sent heat flooding through my body. "So do you," I replied, then immediately felt foolish for the inadequacy of the words. Beautiful didn't begin to cover what Joan was. She was devastating. Breathtaking. A work of art that made my fingers itch to touch. "Wine," she offered, and I nodded gratefully. I needed something to calm my nerves, though I suspected nothing would be able to quiet the thunderous beating of my heart. She led me to the kitchen, where she'd been preparing what looked like an elaborate pasta dish. Everything smelled incredible, but I found it hard to focus on anything other than the way she moved around her space with easy familiarity. "I hope you like Italian," she said, handing me a glass of red wine. Our fingers brushed during the exchange, and I had to suppress a gasp at the contact. "I love it," I said, though I wasn't sure I'd be able to eat anything. My stomach was tied in knots of anticipation and desire. She smiled and turned back to the stove, and I took the opportunity to study her profile. The elegant line of her jaw, the way her hair fell across her shoulder, the graceful movements of her hands as she stirred the sauce. Everything about her was mesmerizing. "How long have you been playing basketball?" I asked, needing to fill the silence before I did something reckless like confess my obsession with her. "Since middle school," she replied, glancing over at me. "My older brother taught me. He said I needed to learn to be aggressive, to take up space." "You certainly do that," I said, thinking of how she commanded the court, how she'd walked across the gymnasium with such confidence. She laughed, and the sound sent warmth spreading through my chest. "Is that a good thing?" "It's a very good thing," I said, perhaps too quickly. "You're commanding. In the best way." She turned to face me fully, her expression curious. "Commanding?" I felt my cheeks burn. "I just mean, you have this presence. When you walk into a room, people notice. When you're on the court, you own it completely. And you like that?" The question was loaded, and I could feel the weight of her gaze on me. I took a sip of wine, hoping it would give me courage. "I like watching you," I admitted. "Maybe too much." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, pleasure, something deeper I couldn't quite identify. She set down her wooden spoon and stepped closer to me, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "Too much," she repeated softly. I swallowed hard. "I think about you. A lot. More than I probably should." "What do you think about?" The question was barely above a whisper, but it crashed into me with merciless force. My entire body flushed with heat as images from my fantasies flashed through my mind. Joan's hands on my skin, her mouth on mine, the sound of her breathing my name. "Charlie," she prompted when I didn't answer immediately. "I think about what it would feel like to touch you," I whispered, my voice shaking with honesty. "What you might taste like. What sounds you'd make if I kissed you." The air between us crackled with tension. Joan's eyes had gone dark, her breathing slightly uneven. She reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and cupped my face in her hand. "And what do you imagine I'd taste like?" she asked, her thumb tracing my cheekbone. "Like everything I've ever wanted," I breathed. She moved closer, so close I could feel the heat radiating from her body. "Charlie, I need you to know something." "What?" "I've been thinking about you too. Every day since that first class when you walked in wearing that blue sweater that made your eyes look like storm clouds. I've been thinking about what it would be like to touch you, to kiss you, to hear you say my name when I'm making you feel good." Her words sent liquid fire straight to my core. I was drowning in her proximity, in the scent of her skin and the warmth of her hand on my face. "I've never wanted anyone the way I want you," she continued, her voice low and rough with desire. "It's been driving me crazy, watching you from across the room and not being able to touch you." "You can touch me now," I whispered, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. For a heartbeat, we just looked at each other, balanced on the edge of something that would change everything. Then Joan was leaning in, and I was rising to meet her, and our lips were finally touching. The kiss was electric, sending shockwaves through my entire system. Her lips were soft but demanding, moving against mine with a hunger that matched my own. I melted into her, my hands fisting in her dress as she deepened the kiss, her tongue sliding against mine in a dance that made me moan helplessly. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Joan rested her forehead against mine, her hand still cupping my face. "Dinner's going to burn," she murmured, though she made no move to step away. "I don't care," I replied, and I meant it. Food was the last thing on my mind when Joan was looking at me like she wanted to devour me whole. She laughed, low and throaty, and the sound went straight to my core. "We should probably eat something. We're going to need our energy." The implication in her words made my knees weak. She turned off the burner and began plating our food, but the domestic task felt surreal when the air was still thick with sexual tension. We ate on her couch, sitting closer than necessary, our thighs touching as we balanced plates on our laps. The food was delicious, but I could barely taste it. Every accidental brush of our hands as we reached for our wine glasses sent sparks through me. When Joan laughed at something I said, leaning into me slightly, I nearly dropped my fork. "You're not eating much," she observed, and I realized I'd been pushing food around my plate more than actually consuming it. "I'm distracted," I admitted. "By what?" I set down my fork and turned to face her fully. "By you. By how badly I want to kiss you again." Her eyes darkened, and she set aside her own plate. "What's stopping you?" "Nothing." Absolutely nothing was stopping me except my own hesitation, my fear of wanting too much too fast. But looking at Joan, seeing the desire written clearly across her beautiful face, I realized that fear was stupid. We both wanted this. We both felt this pull. I leaned in and kissed her again, softer this time but no less intense. She tasted like wine and possibility, and when she made a small sound of pleasure against my lips, I thought I might spontaneously combust. This time when we broke apart, Joan's hand was resting on my thigh, her thumb tracing small circles through the fabric of my dress. The innocent touch sent heat shooting straight to my core. "Charlie," she said, her voice husky, "I need you to know that I don't usually do this. I don't usually invite women over after barely knowing them." "Neither do I replied, though the truth was I'd never wanted to before. I'd never felt this overwhelming need to be close to someone, to touch and be touched. "But I can't seem to help myself with you," she continued. "You've been in my head for weeks, and now that you're here, now that I know you want this too." She trailed off, but her hand moved slightly higher on my thigh, and the gesture said everything she didn't. I was drowning in sensation, in the heat of her touch and the intensity of her gaze. "I want this," I confirmed, my voice stronger than I felt. "I want you." Joan's eyes fluttered closed for a moment, as if my words had affected her physically. When she opened them again, they were dark with desire. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Because once we cross this line, I don't think I'll be able to go back to just watching you from across the room." "I don't want to go back," I said fiercely. "I'm tired of watching from a distance. I'm tired of wanting you and not being able to have you." Joan studied my face for a long moment, searching for any sign of hesitation. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she was suddenly standing, extending her hand to me. "Come with me," she said simply. I took her hand without hesitation, allowing her to pull me up from the couch. She led me down the short hallway to her bedroom, and my heart was beating so hard I was sure she could hear it. Her room was dimly lit by a single lamp, the bed unmade in a way that felt intimate and inviting. Joan turned to face me, her hands settling on my waist, and I could feel the heat of her palms through my dress. "We can go slow," she said, though her voice was strained with the effort of control. "We don't have to." I silenced her with a kiss, pouring all my pent-up longing into the contact. She responded immediately, her hands tightening on my waist as she pulled me closer. This kiss was different from the others, deeper, more desperate, full of weeks of suppressed desire finally being given free rein. I could feel her heart racing against my chest, could taste the wine on her tongue as she explored my mouth with increasing urgency. When she nipped gently at my bottom lip, I gasped and pressed closer, needing more contact, more of her. Her hands began to wander, sliding up my sides to rest just below my breasts. The almost touch was maddening, and I arched into her, silently begging for more. She seemed to understand, her thumbs brushing across my nipples through the thin fabric of my dress. I moaned into her mouth, the sound emerging from somewhere deep in my chest. I'd never made noises like that before, never felt pleasure so intense it demanded vocal expression. But Joan's touch was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. "God, Charlie," she breathed against my lips. "You're so responsive." Her words sent another wave of heat through me. I wanted to be responsive for her, wanted to give her every reaction she could desire. I wanted to be everything she needed. Slowly, reverently, she began to slide the straps of my dress down my shoulders. The fabric pulled around my feet, leaving me standing before her in just my bra and underwear. I should have felt exposed, vulnerable, but the way Joan was looking at me, like I was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen, made me feel powerful instead. "You're perfect," she whispered, her hands skimming over my newly exposed skin. So perfect. I reached for the zipper of her dress, my fingers clumsy with desire. She helped me, and soon she was standing before me in matching black lingerie that made my mouth go dry. Her body was even more incredible than I'd imagined, all smooth curves and toned muscle, a perfect combination of strength and femininity. We came together again, skin against skin, and the sensation was overwhelming. I could feel every point of contact between us, every place where our bodies touched, sending sparks through my nervous system. When she walked me backward toward the bed, I went willingly, ready to surrender to whatever she wanted to give me. The backs of my knees hit the mattress, and I sat down, looking up at her. Joan stood between my parted thighs, her hands resting on my shoulders, her eyes dark with desire. The position was intimate, charged, and I could feel wetness gathering between my legs as she looked down at me. "Are you nervous?" she asked softly, her thumbs tracing patterns on my collarbones. Terrified, I admitted, but not in a bad way. In an excited way, like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing you're about to jump. Joan's smile was tender. "I'm nervous too. You make me nervous in the best possible way." She leaned down and kissed me again, her hands tangling in my hair as she tilted my head back. I could taste the wine on her breath, could feel the barely restrained hunger in the way she moved against me. When she gently pushed me back onto the bed, I went eagerly, pulling her down with me. The weight of her body covering mine was everything I'd imagined and more. She was warm and solid and real, no longer just a fantasy, but flesh and blood and beating heart pressed against me. I ran my hands over her back, marveling at the play of muscle beneath her skin, the way she shivered when I traced the line of her spine. Joan's mouth found my neck, pressing open-mouthed kisses along the sensitive skin. Each touch sent jolts of electricity through me, and I arched beneath her, wanting more contact, more pressure, more of everything she was willing to give. "You smell incredible," she murmured against my throat, her breath hot on my skin. "Like vanilla and something darker. Something that's just you." Her words made me dizzy with want. I'd never had someone pay such attention to me, never had someone notice the small details that made me who I was. With Joan, I felt seen in a way that was both exhilarating and vulnerable. She worked her way down my body with agonizing slowness, her lips and tongue exploring every inch of exposed skin. When she reached the edge of my bra, she paused, looking up at me with a question in her eyes. "Please," I whispered, the word torn from my throat. She reached behind me to unclasp my bra, and I lifted my arms to help her remove it. When her eyes fell on my bare breasts, she drew in a sharp breath. "Beautiful," she murmured, her hands coming up to cup me gently. "So beautiful." When her mouth closed around my nipple, I cried out, my back arching off the bed. The sensation was intense, electric, sending waves of pleasure radiating outward from the point of contact. She lavished attention on both breasts, her tongue swirling and her teeth grazing gently until I was writhing beneath her, desperate for more. "Joan, please," I gasped, though I wasn't entirely sure what I was begging for. She seemed to understand anyway. Her hand slid down my stomach, fingers dancing along the waistband of my underwear. The anticipation was killing me, and when she finally slipped her hand inside, I nearly sobbed with relief. "You're so wet," she breathed against my skin, her fingers exploring my folds with gentle curiosity. "Is this all for me?" "Yes," I managed, my hips lifting involuntarily to meet her touch. "All for you. Always for you." Joan's fingers found my clit, circling it with the perfect amount of pressure. I'd touched myself countless times thinking about this moment, but nothing had prepared me for the reality of her hands on my body. She seemed to know exactly what I needed, how to build the pleasure slowly until I was trembling on the edge. "Look at me," she commanded softly, and I forced my eyes open to meet her gaze. The intensity one found there nearly undid me. She was watching my face as she touched me, reading every micro-expression, adjusting her movements based on my reactions. "You're incredible," she whispered, her fingers moving faster now. "The way you respond to me, the sounds you make. I could touch you like this for hours." I wanted to tell her that she could, that I would let her do whatever she wanted to my body, but words were becoming impossible. The pleasure was building to an unbearable peak, every nerve ending singing with sensation. "Come for me, Charlie," Joan breathed, and her voice was like a key turning in a lock. My body obeyed instantly, pleasure crashing over me in waves so intense I saw stars. I cried out her name, my body convulsing as she continued to touch me through the aftershocks. When I finally came back to myself, Joan was pressing soft kisses to my face, her hand stroking my hair soothingly. I started, then trailed off because there weren't words for what I'd just experienced. "Amazing," Joan finished, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "You're amazing." I turned in her arms, suddenly desperate to touch her the way she'd touched me. "Your turn," I said, my hands already reaching for her remaining clothes. Joan caught my wrists gently. "We have all night," she said. "No rush." But I was already rushing, already desperate to explore every inch of her body with my hands and mouth. I'd waited so long for this, dreamed about it so many times, and now that it was real, I wanted to savor every moment. I kissed her deeply, pouring all my gratitude and desire into the contact. She tasted like wine and promise, and when she moaned softly into my mouth, I felt a fresh wave of arousal wash over me. Slowly, carefully, I removed her remaining clothes, revealing the body I'd fantasized about for weeks. She was even more beautiful than I'd imagined, all smooth curves and toned muscle, feminine strength that made my mouth water. I took my time exploring her, mapping every freckle and scar with my lips and tongue. Joan was beautifully responsive, arching into my touch and making soft sounds of pleasure that guided my movements. When I finally worked my way down to taste her, she tangled her hands in my hair and gasped my name like a prayer. Making Joan come apart beneath my mouth was the most powerful thing I'd ever experienced. Watching her face as pleasure built, feeling her thighs tremble around my head, Hearing the increasingly desperate sounds she made, it was better than any fantasy I'd ever created. When she finally crested, crying out in a voice hoarse with pleasure, I felt a surge of pride and possessiveness. I had done that. I had made this beautiful, strong woman lose control, had brought her to the peak of ecstasy with my touch. Afterward, we lay tangled together in her sheets, our bodies slick with sweat and satisfaction. Joan traced lazy patterns on my skin while I mapped the geography of her shoulder with my fingertips. "I have a confession," she said eventually, her voice soft in the darkness. "What?" "I've been coming to psychology class 20 minutes early just to watch you walk in." I lifted my head to look at her, amazed. "Really?" "Really. You have this way of moving that's completely unconscious, like you don't realize how graceful you are. And when you concentrate, you get this little furrow between your eyebrows that I've wanted to smooth away with my thumb." She demonstrated, pressing her thumb gently between my brows, and I melted at the tenderness of the gesture. "I thought I was being subtle," I said. "Watching you, I mean." Joan laughed. "About as subtle as a freight train. But I loved it. I loved knowing that you were watching me, that you were thinking about me even when we weren't in the same room." We talked for hours, sharing stories and secrets as our hands wandered lazily over each other's bodies. I learned that Joan was studying sports medicine, that she wanted to work with professional athletes someday. She told me about growing up with 3 brothers, how she'd had to fight for every scrap of attention and space. "Sometimes I worry I'm too much," she admitted, her voice quiet. "Too aggressive, too intense." My ex used to say I overwhelmed her. I turned to face her fully, cupping her jaw in my hand. "You don't overwhelm me. You intoxicate me. There's a difference." Joan's eyes searched mine, looking for any sign of deception. Whatever she found there must have reassured her, because she smiled and pulled me closer. "I've never felt like this before," she whispered against my hair. "Like I could lose myself completely in someone else." "Then lose yourself," I murmured back. "I'll help you find your way back." We made love again as dawn was breaking, slower this time, more tender. Joan worshipped my body with a reverence that brought tears to my eyes, and I returned the favor, pouring all my emotion into every kiss and caress. When we finally fell asleep, we were wrapped around each other so tightly it was impossible to tell where one of us ended and the other began. I'd never felt so complete, so perfectly matched with another person. Joan fit against me like she'd been custom-made for my arms, and I drifted off to sleep thinking that I could happily spend the rest of my life exactly like this. She told me about growing up with 3 brothers, how she'd had to fight for every scrap of attention and space. "Sometimes I worry I'm too much," she admitted, her voice quiet. "Too aggressive, too intense." My ex used to say I overwhelmed her. I turned to face her fully, cupping her jaw in my hand. "You don't overwhelm me. You intoxicate me. There's a difference." Joan's eyes searched mine, looking for any sign of deception. Whatever she found there must have reassured her, because she smiled and pulled me closer. "I've never felt like this before," she whispered against my hair. "Like I could lose myself completely in someone else." "Then lose yourself," I murmured back. "I'll help you find your way back." We made love again as dawn was breaking, slower this time, more tender. Joan worshipped my body with a reverence that brought tears to my eyes, and I returned the favor, pouring all my emotion into every kiss and caress. When we finally fell asleep, we were wrapped around each other so tightly it was impossible to tell where one of us ended and the other began. I'd never felt so complete, so perfectly matched with another person. Joan fit against me like she'd been custom-made for my arms, and I drifted off to sleep thinking that I could happily spend the rest of my life exactly like this. I woke up slowly, consciousness returning in layers. First, the unfamiliar softness of expensive sheets against my skin. Then the warm weight of an arm draped across my waist. Finally, the intoxicating scent that I now knew belonged to Joan. My eyes fluttered open to find myself facing her sleeping form. In the soft morning light filtering through her curtains, she looked impossibly peaceful. Her features were relaxed, her lips slightly parted, her hair spread across the pillow in dark waves that caught the sunlight. I allowed myself the luxury of studying her without fear of being caught. The elegant curve of her shoulder, the tiny mole just below her left breast, the way her muscles remained subtly defined even in sleep. She was art come to life, and I couldn't believe I was here in her bed, close enough to touch. As if sensing my scrutiny, Joan stirred, her eyes opening slowly. When she saw me watching her, a lazy smile spread across her face. "Morning," she murmured, her voice rough with sleep. "Morning," I replied, suddenly shy despite everything we'd shared the night before. "Sleep well?" she asked, stretching languidly. The movement caused the sheet to slip lower, revealing more of her beautiful body, and I had to fight the urge to trace the newly exposed skin with my fingertips. Eventually, I said, remembering how we'd stayed awake until nearly dawn, talking and touching and losing ourselves in each other over and over again. Joan laughed, low and throaty. "Come here," she said, reaching for me. I went willingly, allowing her to pull me closer until I was pressed against her side, my head resting on her shoulder. The position felt natural, like we'd been waking up together for years instead of this being our first morning. "I have another confession," Joan said, her fingers combing gently through my hair. "What now?" I asked, tilting my head to look at her. "Last night, that was my first time. With a woman, I mean." I blinked in surprise. Joan had seemed so confident, so sure of herself and what she wanted. "Really?" "Really. I've thought about it before, wondered about it, but I'd never acted on those feelings until now. Until you." The admission made something warm unfurl in my chest. "What changed?" Joan was quiet for a moment, her fingers still moving through my hair. "You did. From the moment I saw you, I knew I had to know what it would be like to touch you, to be with you. It was like you awakened something in me that I didn't even know was sleeping." I understood exactly what she meant. "I've never wanted anyone the way I want you," I confessed. "It's been consuming me. Some days I could barely concentrate because I was so busy thinking about you." "What did you think about?" she asked, and there was genuine curiosity in her voice. I felt my cheeks warm, but after last night, honesty felt easier. "Everything. The way you move, the way you smile, what your skin might feel like under my hands. I used to watch you in class and imagine what it would be like to kiss you, to make you laugh, to wake up next to you like this." Joan's arm tightened around me. "And how does the reality compare to your imagination?" I propped myself up on my elbow to look at her properly. "There's no comparison. You're so much more than I ever could have imagined. More beautiful, more generous, more perfect." "I'm not perfect," she said softly, and I could hear vulnerability creeping into her voice. "I have issues, Charlie. Insecurities." "Like what?" She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Sometimes I worry that I'm too masculine. My body, I mean. Too muscular, too strong. My ex used to make comments about it, said I looked more like a man than a woman sometimes." The confession hit me like a slap. How could anyone look at Joan, gorgeous, feminine Joan, and see anything but perfection? "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," I said fiercely. "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. Your strength, your muscles, the way you move, it's all completely feminine and completely you. Anyone who can't see that is blind and doesn't deserve you." Joan's eyes filled with tears, and I realized how deeply that criticism had hurt her. I leaned down and kissed her softly, trying to pour all my conviction into the contact. "I love your body," I whispered against her lips. "I love how strong you are, how you can dominate a basketball court and then touch me so gently it makes me cry. I love your shoulders and your arms and the way your thighs feel when they're wrapped around me." To prove my point, I began kissing my way down her body, paying special attention to all the places her ex had criticized. I kissed her shoulders, strong and broad and absolutely feminine. I traced the definition in her arms with my tongue, marveling at the way she shivered beneath my touch. I mapped the muscles of her stomach with reverent lips, showing her wordlessly how much I treasured every inch of her. By the time I was finished, Joan was breathing hard and looking at me with wonder. No one's ever. She started, then shook her head. You make me feel beautiful. Because you are beautiful, I said simply. And anyone who made you feel otherwise was wrong. We spent the morning making love again, this time with a tenderness that bordered on worship. I took my time learning her body, discovering that she had a sensitive spot just behind her ear that made her gasp when I kissed it, that she loved having her inner thighs stroked, that she made the most incredible sounds when I used my tongue on her. Joan was equally thorough in her exploration of me, finding nerve endings I didn't know existed and learning exactly how to touch me to make me sob with pleasure. She was a quick study, filing away every reaction for future reference, building a mental map of what made me fall apart in her arms. When we finally collapsed together, sated and breathless, the sun was high in the sky. My body felt loose and satisfied, marked by Joan's touch in ways both visible and invisible. I could still feel the ghost of her hands on my skin, the echo of her mouth on mine. I should probably go home, I said reluctantly, though the last thing I wanted was to leave this warm cocoon we'd created. Or, Joan said, tracing patterns on my bare shoulder, you could stay. We could order takeout, watch movies, see what happens. The invitation was tempting, more than tempting. The thought of spending an entire day with Joan, of learning more about her beyond just the physical, made my heart race with anticipation. I don't have any clothes, I pointed out weakly. You can borrow mine, she said immediately. Though I have to say, I'm quite fond of you exactly as you are right now. I looked down at my naked body, surprised by how comfortable I felt being exposed with her. Usually, I was self-conscious about my small breasts, my soft stomach, but Joan looked at me like I was a masterpiece. Okay, I said. I'll stay. Joan's smile was radiant. Really? Really. I can't think of anywhere I'd rather be. She leaned over and kissed me softly, a kiss full of promise and possibility. Good. Because I have plans for you. The next several hours were a revelation. We ordered Chinese food and ate it on her couch while she wore an oversized basketball jersey and I was wrapped in one of her button-down shirts. The domestic intimacy of it was almost as intoxicating as the physical connection we'd shared. Joan told me about her childhood, growing up the only girl in a house full of boys. How she'd learned to be tough, to fight for what she wanted, but also how she sometimes felt like she had to hide her softer side to be taken seriously. I've always been afraid that if I let people see the real me, the one who cries at movies and loves romantic comedies, they'd think I was weak, she admitted, curled up next to me on the couch. The real you is incredible, I said, stroking her hair. Strong and soft, fierce and gentle. You don't have to choose. She looked at me with such gratitude that it made my chest tight with emotion. You see me, she said quietly. Really see me. I've never had that before. I understood exactly what she meant. Joan saw me too, not just the surface version I showed the world, but the real me underneath. The one who felt everything too deeply, who wanted too much, who'd been afraid to reach for what she desired until now. As the day wore on, we gravitated toward each other constantly. Joan would be telling a story and absently stroke my arm. I'd be listening and find myself tracing patterns on her thigh. We couldn't seem to stop touching, as if we were making up for all those weeks of wanting from a distance. Can I tell you something? Joan said as we lay on her couch later that afternoon, my head in her lap while she played with my hair. Anything. I used to time my arrival to class, so I'd walk in right after you. I loved watching you settle into your seat, the ritual you had with your notebook and pens. You're so methodical, so careful with everything you do. I twisted to look up at her. You were watching me too? Constantly. I knew what you wore every day, how you tied your hair, what mood you seemed to be in based on your posture. I became an expert in Charlie watching. The revelation that she'd been as fixated on me as I was on her was overwhelming. All those times I'd thought I was invisible, she'd been paying attention. All those moments I'd believed were one-sided had actually been mutual. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" I asked. Joan's expression grew vulnerable. Fear. What if I was wrong about what I saw between us? What if you didn't feel the same way? I'd rather have you as a distant possibility than risk losing you entirely. I sat up and kissed her, trying to convey everything I felt through the contact. "You'll never lose me," I whispered against her lips. "Not now. Not after this." As evening approached, the sexual tension between us began building again. It started with innocent touches that lingered too long, glances that held too much heat. By the time we decided to make dinner together, the air was thick with unspoken desire. Joan was chopping vegetables while I stirred the sauce, and we kept bumping into each other in the small kitchen. Each contact sent sparks through me, and I could tell from Joan's increasingly heavy breathing that she was feeling it too. When she reached over me to grab something from the cabinet, her body pressed against my back, and I felt her breath on my neck. I melted back into her, and she dropped her arms to wrap around my waist. "Charlie," she murmured, her lips brushing my ear. I turned in her arms, and she backed me against the counter, her hands braced on either side of me. The position was dominating, possessive, and it made me dizzy with want. "The food," I started weakly. "Can wait," she finished, her mouth already finding my neck. This time was different from the night before. More urgent, more desperate, as if we were both trying to make up for lost time. Joan lifted me onto the counter, and I wrapped my legs around her waist, pulling her closer as she kissed me with bruising intensity. We made love right there in her kitchen, frantic and passionate, unable to wait even the few steps to the bedroom. I came apart in her arms while dinner grew cold on the stove, and afterwards, we could barely stand for the trembling in our legs. "We're never going to eat at this rate," Joan gasped, but she was smiling as she said it. "I'm not hungry for food," I replied, and her eyes darkened with renewed desire. We did eventually manage to eat, though the meal was punctuated by heated glances and meaningful touches. Every time Joan licked sauce from her lips, I had to suppress a moan. When I accidentally dripped sauce on my shirt and had to change into another one of hers, she watched me undress with such intensity that I nearly forgot what I was doing. "You're distracting," she said when I caught her staring. "Good," I replied, and she laughed. That night, we made love again with a slowness that bordered on meditation. Joan took her time with me, exploring every inch of my body as if she was trying to memorize it. She found spots I didn't know were sensitive, made me feel pleasure in ways I'd never experienced before. When it was my turn to worship her, I did so with single-minded devotion. I wanted to know everything about her body, what made her gasp and what made her moan, how to touch her to make her lose control completely. "I love the way you touch me," she whispered as I kissed my way down her stomach. "Like you can't get enough." "I can't," I admitted against her skin. "I'll never get enough of you." I proved it with my mouth and hands, bringing her to climax twice before she pulled me up to kiss her deeply, tasting herself on my lips. "Your turn," she said, but I shook my head. "I just want to hold you," I said, and I meant it. The physical pleasure was incredible, but what I craved even more was this intimacy, this closeness that went beyond just sex. Joan seemed to understand. She pulled me against her, and we lay there in the darkness, our heartbeats gradually slowing to match each other's rhythm. "Charlie," she said softly. What are we doing here?" The question hung between us, loaded with meaning. What were we doing? We'd gone from strangers to lovers in the span of 24 hours, and now we were lying in bed talking about feelings and fears like we'd known each other for years. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I don't want it to stop." "Neither do I," Joan said, relief evident in her voice. "I was afraid you might think this was moving too fast." I turned to face her in the darkness. "Is it moving too fast?" Probably, she said with a laugh. But I don't care. I've never felt anything like this before, Charlie. With you, everything feels right in a way that nothing else ever has. I knew exactly what she meant. Despite the speed at which we'd fallen into this, despite the fact that we were essentially strangers, being with Joan felt like coming home. Like I'd been searching for something my entire life without knowing what it was, and I'd finally found it in her arms. I'm scared, I confessed. This feels too good to be real. I keep waiting for something to go wrong. Joan's hand found mine in the darkness, our fingers intertwining. What if nothing goes wrong? What if this is just the beginning of something incredible? The possibility was both thrilling and terrifying. I'd never allowed myself to hope for something this good, this pure. But looking at Joan, seeing the sincerity in her eyes, I felt myself starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, I deserved this happiness. I'd like that, I whispered. So would I, Joan replied, bringing my hand to her lips to press a soft kiss to my knuckles. We fell asleep again as the sun rose higher, our bodies tangled together in a way that felt permanent. When I woke up the second time, Joan was already awake, watching me with an expression so tender it made my chest ache. How long have you been awake? I asked. A while. I like watching you sleep. You look so peaceful. I stretched cat-like, enjoying the way Joan's eyes tracked the movement. What time is it? Late morning. We've definitely missed our first classes. I should have felt guilty about skipping, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Missing a few lectures seemed like a small price to pay for this time with Joan. Are you hungry? She asked. I could make us breakfast. Starving, I replied, though I wasn't sure if I meant for food or for her. Joan seemed to understand the ambiguity in my words, because she leaned down and kissed me deeply before getting out of bed. I watched her move around the room, pulling on underwear and a tank top, and even these simple domestic actions seemed charged with sexuality. She caught me staring and grinned. Like what you see? Always, I replied honestly, and her smile grew wider. Breakfast was a leisurely affair. Joan made pancakes while I sat at her kitchen counter in one of her shirts, watching her work. She moved with the same grace in the kitchen that she displayed on the basketball court, every action efficient and purposeful. These are incredible, I said after taking a bite. Secret ingredient, Joan said with a wink. Which is love. The word hung between us, and I felt my breath catch. It was the first time either of us had used that word, though the emotion had been building steadily since the moment we'd first kissed. Joan, I started, but she held up a hand. I know it's crazy, she said quickly. I know we barely know each other, that this is all happening incredibly fast. But Charlie, what I feel for you, it's not just attraction. It's not just want. It's deeper than that. My heart was racing, but not with fear. With joy. With relief. With the overwhelming happiness of hearing my own feelings reflected back at me. I love you too, I said, the words spilling out before I could second-guess them. I know it's insane, but I do. I think I started falling for you the first time I saw you. Joan's face lit up like sunrise, and she was around the counter and in my arms before I could blink. She kissed me with desperate relief, as if she'd been holding her breath waiting for my response. Say it again, she whispered against my lips. I love you, I said, and the words felt like coming home. I love you, Joan. I love you too, she replied, and hearing her say it back made me feel like I could fly. We spent the rest of the day in a bubble of new love, barely able to keep our hands off each other. Every touch felt magnified, every kiss loaded with the weight of our confessions. We made love on the couch, slow and sweet, whispering declarations of love between kisses and caresses. I want to know everything about you, Joan said as we lay together afterward, our bodies still joined, still trembling from shared pleasure. What do you want to know? Everything. Your favorite color, what makes you cry, what you dream about when you're alone. I want to know what shaped you into the incredible woman you are. So I told her. About growing up quiet and observant, always on the outside looking in. About my love of books and quiet spaces, my fear of taking up too much room in the world. About how watching her had made me brave in ways I'd never been before. Joan listened to all of it with complete attention, asking questions and sharing her own stories in return. I learned about her competitive nature, how she'd always felt like she had to be the best at everything to earn love and respect. About her secret love of romantic movies and her dream of opening her own physical therapy practice someday. As the day turned into evening, neither of us made any move to leave or suggest I should go home. It felt natural to stay, to continue this exploration of each other's hearts and bodies. We cooked dinner together, and I helped her shower, my hands soapy and gentle as I washed her hair. "This feels like playing house," Joan said as I worked shampoo through her long locks. "Is that bad?" "No," she said, leaning back into my touch. "It feels perfect. Like we're practicing for a life together." The casual mention of a future together made my heart skip, but it didn't scare me the way it should have. With Joan, forever didn't seem like nearly long enough. That night, we made love with a passion that surprised us both. All the tenderness of the day had built into something urgent and desperate, a need to claim each other completely. Joan took me with an intensity that left me gasping, and I returned the favor until we were both crying out in voices hoarse from pleasure. "I can't get enough of you," Joan panted as we lay tangled together afterward. I thought one night would satisfy this craving, but it's only made it stronger. "Good," I whispered, pressing kisses to her sweat-slicked skin. "Because I plan to spend a very long time making sure you never want anyone else." Joan's laugh was breathless and filled with promise. "That sounds like a challenge." "It's a guarantee," I replied, and sealed the vow with a kiss that tasted like forever. 3 weeks after that first night together, Joan asked me on our first official date. We'd been practically living in each other's rooms since our initial encounter, but she wanted to do things properly, as she put it. "I want to court you," she said one morning as we lay in her bed, the sheets tangled around our bare bodies. "I want to take you somewhere beautiful and spend hours talking to you without the distraction of being able to touch you whenever I want." The idea was both appealing and torturous. I'd grown addicted to Joan's touch, to the way she couldn't seem to keep her hands off me whenever we were together. But there was something romantic about the notion of a proper date, of getting dressed up for each other and pretending we were still in the early stages of attraction instead of already deeply, irrevocably in love. "Where did you have in mind?" I asked. "It's a surprise," Joan said with a mysterious smile. "Just wear something beautiful. Though you always look beautiful, so that shouldn't be difficult." I spent far too long getting ready, trying on half my wardrobe before settling on a deep blue dress that Joan had once mentioned brought out my eyes. I did my makeup carefully, taking time with mascara and lipstick, wanting to look perfect for her. When Joan arrived to pick me up, 20 minutes late, as usual, I opened my door to find her standing there in a black suit that fit her like it had been tailored specifically for her body. She'd styled her hair in loose waves, and she was wearing the perfume I'd come to associate with home. "Wow," she breathed, her eyes traveling over me with obvious appreciation. "You look devastating," I supplied with a grin. "I was going to say stunning, but devastating works too," she replied, stepping closer to kiss me softly. "Are you ready?" I nodded, grabbing my purse and jacket. Joan offered me her arm with old-fashioned gallantry, and I slipped my hand through the crook of her elbow, marveling at the solid strength I felt there. The surprise turned out to be a rooftop restaurant downtown, one I'd never even known existed. The view of the city was breathtaking, lights twinkling like stars below us, but I found myself far more interested in watching Joan across the candlelit table. "This is incredible," I said, gesturing to the view. "I wanted somewhere special," Joan replied. "Somewhere worthy of you." The evening unfolded like a dream. We talked for hours, sharing stories and secrets as we worked our way through course after course of exquisite food. Joan told me about her dreams of working with Olympic athletes, and I shared my aspirations of becoming a therapist, helping people navigate their deepest fears and desires. What's your biggest fear? Joan asked as we shared dessert, and the question caught me off guard. Losing this, I said without hesitation. Losing you. Having this turn out to be temporary when it feels so permanent. Joan's expression grew serious. Charlie, I need you to understand something. What we have, it's not temporary for me. I've never felt anything like this before, and I don't want to feel anything like this for anyone else. Relief flooded through me, so intense it was almost overwhelming. Really? Really? You've ruined me for other people. No one else could possibly compare. After dinner, we walked through the city, Joan's arm around my waist, my head resting on her shoulder. The night was crisp and clear, perfect for wandering and talking and stealing kisses in doorways like teenagers. I have a confession, I said as we paused in a small park, sitting on a bench beneath a street lamp. Another one? Joan asked with amusement. How many secrets are you hiding? Just this one, I promise. I turned to face her, suddenly serious. That first night, when we made love, it wasn't just my first time with a woman. It was my first time, period. Joan's eyes widened in surprise. Charlie, really? I nodded, feeling vulnerable but also relieved to finally share this truth. I'd never been with anyone before you, man or woman. I was waiting for. I don't know what I was waiting for, but I think it was you. Joan's expression softened, and she reached up to cup my face gently. You gave me your first time. I gave you everything, I said simply. Because you're worth everything. Tears gathered in Joan's eyes, and she kissed me with a tenderness that made my soul ache. I'm honored, she whispered against my lips. Truly. That you trusted me with something so precious. It was always going to be you, I said. From the moment I saw you, I knew. My body knew. My heart knew. Joan pulled me closer, holding me like I was something infinitely precious. I love you so much it scares me sometimes, she confessed. I've never needed anyone the way I need you. Then don't let me go, I said. Never let me go. Never, she promised, and I believed her completely. We walked home slowly, reluctant to end our perfect evening. Joan's apartment had become our sanctuary, the place where we could be completely ourselves without fear or pretense. As soon as we stepped inside, the careful distance we'd maintained during dinner evaporated. Joan pressed me against the closed door, her mouth finding mine with desperate hunger. This kiss was different from the tender ones we'd shared during dinner. This was need and want and 3 weeks of accumulated desire finally being given free rein. I've been thinking about touching you all night, she breathed against my lips. Sitting across from you, watching you eat, and all I could think about was getting you home and out of this dress. Her words sent heat spiraling through me. What stopped you from touching me at dinner? Public decency, she replied with a grin. And the fact that I didn't want to be arrested for indecent exposure. I laughed, but the sound turned into a gasp as Joan's hands found the zipper of my dress. She lowered it slowly, pressing kisses to each inch of skin she revealed, until the fabric pulled around my feet and I was standing before her in just my lingerie. God, you're perfect, she murmured, her hands skimming over my curves. How did I get so lucky? Before I could respond, she was lifting me, my legs wrapping automatically around her waist as she carried me to the bedroom. The display of strength made me dizzy with want, and I kissed her neck hungrily as she walked. This time, our lovemaking was different from all the times before. There was an emotional intensity to it that went beyond physical pleasure, a sense of claiming and being claimed that left us both shaking. Joan touched me like she was trying to merge our souls, and I responded with a desperation that surprised us both. I love you, I gasped as she moved above me, her body joined with mine in the most intimate way possible. I love you so much. I love you too, she replied, her voice breaking with emotion. More than I thought it was possible to love someone. We moved together in perfect synchronization, our bodies finding a rhythm that felt ancient and inevitable. When the pleasure finally crested, we came together, crying out each other's names like they were the only words that mattered. Afterward, we lay wrapped around each other, our hearts gradually slowing to a shared rhythm. I felt complete in a way I'd never experienced before, like all the scattered pieces of myself had finally found their proper places. "Charlie," Joan said softly, her fingers tracing patterns on my bare shoulder. "Yes, I want to ask you something, but I'm nervous about it." I turned to look at her, concerned by the vulnerability in her voice. "You can ask me anything." Joan took a deep breath, as if gathering her courage. "I know this is fast. I know we've only been together for a few weeks, but would you be my girlfriend? Officially, I mean. Not just whatever this is we're doing." The question made my heart soar. "Joan." "I know it soon," she continued quickly, misreading my hesitation. "If you need more time." "Yes," I interrupted, unable to let her finish the thought. "Yes, of course, yes. I want nothing more than to be your girlfriend." Joan's face lit up with joy so pure it took my breath away. "Really? Really? I've been yours since that first night. Hell, I've been yours since the first time I saw you. I just didn't know if you wanted me to be." Joan kissed me then, and I could taste her tears of happiness on her lips. "I want you to be mine," she whispered. "Only mine. Always, I promised. For as long as you'll have me." "Forever, then," Joan said with certainty. "Because I'm never letting you go." As we drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, I reflected on how drastically my life had changed in such a short time. A month ago, I'd been invisible, watching Joan from afar and believing she could never want someone like me. Now I was her girlfriend, the person she'd chosen to love and be loved by. The transformation felt miraculous, like I'd been sleepwalking through my life until Joan woke me up. She'd shown me what it meant to be desired, to be cherished, to be loved with an intensity that was both gentle and consuming. I thought about all the nights I'd lain awake wanting her, all the days I'd spent memorizing her movements from across a room. It seemed impossible that those desperate longings had led to this, to Joan's arms around me, her promise of forever, the certain knowledge that I was exactly where I belonged. "I love you," I whispered into the darkness, though Joan was already asleep. In response, her arms tightened around me slightly, and she murmured my name against my hair. Even in sleep, she was claiming me, holding me close, making sure I knew I was precious to her. I closed my eyes and let myself fall into the deepest, most peaceful sleep of my life, secure in the knowledge that I would wake up loved, wanted, and home. The next morning brought our first real challenge as a couple. I was supposed to go home, to gather more clothes and check on my neglected responsibilities, but the thought of being apart from Joan for even a few hours felt unbearable. "Come with me," I said as we lay in bed, reluctant to start the day. "Help me pack. I want you to see my space." Joan's face lit up. "You want me to see your room?" "I want you to see everything," I said honestly. "I want to share my whole life with you." My dorm room was tiny compared to Joan's off-campus apartment, barely big enough for a bed and desk. But Joan moved through the space like she belonged there, touching my books and photographs with gentle curiosity. "This is where you've been thinking about me," she said, sitting on my narrow bed. "Every night," I confirmed. "I'd lie here and imagine what it would be like to touch you, to kiss you, to have you want me back." "Show me," Joan said, her voice low and compelling. "Show me how you thought about me." The request sent heat flooding through me. I moved to straddle her on my small bed, my hands framing her face as I kissed her the way I dreamed about kissing her for weeks. Joan responded immediately, her hands gripping my hips as she pulled me closer. "I used to picture you touching me here," I whispered, guiding her hand to my breast. "And here," I added, moving her palm to the sensitive spot just below my ear. Joan followed my guidance eagerly, her touch reverent and hungry. "What else?" she asked between kisses. I imagined what you'd sound like when I made you come, I said boldly, my hand sliding down to cup her through her jeans. What your face would look like when you lost control. Joan's breathing quickened. And what did you imagine? That you'd be beautiful, I said, already working at the button of her pants. That you'd say my name like it was the only word you remembered. I proved my point by touching her until she was gasping and writhing beneath me, her head thrown back in abandon as I brought her to the edge again and again before finally letting her fall. Charlie, she cried out as she came, and the sound was even more beautiful than I'd imagined. Afterward, we packed quickly, both eager to return to Joan's larger bed and more private space. But first, I wanted to show her one more thing. I pulled out my journal, the one I'd been keeping since freshman year. I wrote about you, I admitted, flipping to the pages filled with my desperate scribblings. Before we met, before I knew your name. I wrote about the woman I couldn't stop watching. Joan read silently, her expression growing more amazed with each entry. Charlie, this is poetry. The way you describe watching me, wanting me, it's beautiful. It's obsession, I said with embarrassment. I was completely consumed by you. I love that you were consumed by me, Joan said fiercely. I love that you wanted me that much, that you felt it deep enough to write about it. She kept reading, and I watched her face as she discovered the extent of my infatuation. The late-night entries about dreams of her body. The detailed descriptions of how she moved, how she laughed, how she made me feel. The increasingly desperate confessions of love for someone I'd never spoken to. Listen to this, Joan said, reading aloud from one of my entries. She has this way of running her tongue across her bottom lip when she's thinking that makes me forget everything else. I wonder if she knows how distracting it is, how it makes me want to lean across the classroom and taste that lip for myself. I groaned and buried my face in my hands. That's mortifying. That's romantic, Joan corrected, pulling my hands away from my face. Charlie, don't you see? You fell in love with me before you even knew me. Not with some fantasy version, but with the real me. You saw who I was just by watching how I moved through the world. Put that way, it did seem romantic rather than stalkerish. I'd fallen for Joan's essence, the truth of who she was that came through in every gesture and expression. I've never had anyone pay attention to me the way you did, Joan continued. No one's ever noticed that I bite my lip when I'm nervous or that I tap my fingers when I'm frustrated. You saw me when I thought I was invisible. You could never be invisible, I said. You're too bright, too alive. You command attention just by existing. Joan kissed me then, soft and sweet, and I could taste gratitude on her lips. I love you, she murmured. I love how you see me, how you want me, how you make me feel like the most important person in the world. You are the most important person in my world, I replied honestly. You're everything. We made it back to her apartment, but barely. In the elevator, Joan pressed me against the wall and kissed me breathless, her hands roaming over my body through my dress. By the time we reached her floor, we were both trembling with need. I need you, Joan gasped as she fumbled with her keys. Right now. We stumbled through her door, already pulling at each other's clothes. This time there was no slow seduction, no careful exploration. This was pure hunger, weeks of love, and lust finally finding their perfect expression. Joan lifted me onto her kitchen counter again, and I wrapped my legs around her waist as she kissed me with bruising intensity. Her hands were everywhere, touching and claiming and driving me wild with need. I love you, she panted against my neck. I love you so fucking much. The profanity was unlike her usual careful speech, and it sent electricity shooting through me. I loved seeing her lose control, loved knowing that I could affect her so deeply that her composure cracked. Show me, I demanded, my hands tangling in her hair. Show me how much. Joan's response was to lift me from the counter and carry me to the bedroom, laying me down on her bed with reverent care. Then she proceeded to worship my body with a dedication that left me sobbing with pleasure. She took her time, kissing and licking and sucking until every nerve ending was singing. When she finally settled between my thighs, her mouth on the most intimate part of me, I nearly screamed from the intensity of it. "You taste like heaven," she murmured against my sensitive flesh, and the vibration of her words sent shockwaves through me. I could do this for hours. She proved it by bringing me to climax 3 times with her mouth alone, each orgasm more intense than the last. By the time she finally moved up to kiss me, I was shaking and boneless, my body wrung out from pleasure. "My turn," I gasped, but Joan shook her head. "I'm not done with you yet," she said with a wicked smile that made my stomach flutter. She made love to me for what felt like hours, using her hands and mouth and body to drive me to heights of pleasure I'd never imagined possible. She was thorough and generous and absolutely relentless, as if she was determined to ruin me for anyone else. Not that there could ever be anyone else. Joan had spoiled me completely, shown me what it meant to be loved with total devotion. How could I ever want anyone else when she touched me like I was precious, looked at me like I hung the stars, made me feel like the most desirable woman alive? When she finally allowed me to reciprocate, I lavished the same attention on her body, determined to give her even a fraction of the pleasure she'd given me. Joan was beautifully responsive, arching and gasping beneath my touch, her hands fisted in the sheets as I explored every inch of her with devoted thoroughness. "Charlie," she moaned as I worked my way down her body. "Please, I need." "What do you need?" I asked, though I already knew. I could see it in the tension of her muscles, the way her hips lifted toward me in silent supplication. "You," she gasped. "Just you. Always you." I gave her what she needed, using everything she'd taught me about pleasure to drive her wild. When she finally came apart beneath my mouth, crying out my name in a voice hoarse with ecstasy, I felt a surge of pride and possessiveness that was almost overwhelming. Afterward, we lay together in the tangle of sheets, our bodies still trembling from the intensity of what we'd shared. Joan traced lazy patterns on my skin while I mapped the landscape of her shoulder with my fingertips. That was. Joan started, then trailed off. "Life-changing," I finished, and she nodded. "I didn't know it could be like that," she said quietly. "So intense, so emotional. Like our souls were touching along with our bodies." I knew exactly what she meant. What we'd just shared went far beyond physical pleasure. It was connection on the deepest level, a joining that felt spiritual in its intensity. "I want to wake up next to you every morning," Joan said suddenly. "I want to fall asleep in your arms every night. I want to share everything with you, my space, my dreams, my future." My heart raced at the implications of her words. "Joan, move in with me," she said, propping herself up on her elbow to look at me seriously. "I know it's fast. I know we've only been together officially for a few weeks, but Charlie, I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore." The offer was everything I'd secretly been hoping for but hadn't dared to ask. The thought of sharing space with Joan, of truly building a life together, was almost too wonderful to believe. "Are you sure?" I asked. "It's a big step." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Joan replied with conviction. "You belong here with me. This is where you're supposed to be." Looking into her eyes, seeing the absolute certainty there, I felt my last reservations crumble. Joan was right. This was where I belonged. In her arms, in her bed, in her life. "Yes," I said, and Joan's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Yes, I want to live with you." She kissed me then, deep and claiming, and I could taste joy on her lips. "Really?" "Really. Though I have to warn you, I'm not the easiest person to live with. I leave books everywhere, and I sing in the shower, and sometimes I stay up too late reading." "I can't wait to discover all your quirks," Joan said with a grin. "I want to learn everything about you. How you like your morning beverages, what side of the bed you prefer, what you look like when you're concentrating on something you love." The domestic intimacy she was describing made my chest warm with anticipation. I'd never lived with a romantic partner before, never shared space and routines and the mundane details of daily life. With Joan, even the ordinary seemed extraordinary. When? I asked. Tomorrow, if you want. We can get your things, make this official. The speed of it should have scared me, but instead it felt perfect. Why wait when we both knew this was right? Why hesitate when we'd already given each other our hearts completely? Tomorrow, I agreed, and sealed the promise with a kiss. That night, we made love with a passion and intensity that surpassed everything that had come before. It was our celebration, our claiming, our promise to each other wrapped up in gasps and moans and whispered declarations of love. Joan took me apart piece by piece, then put me back together with gentle hands and loving words. I did the same for her, marveling at how she trusted me with her pleasure, her vulnerability, her heart. "You're mine now," she whispered as we moved together in perfect harmony. "Completely mine." "Yours," I agreed breathlessly. "Only yours." When we finally collapsed together, exhausted and satisfied, I felt like I was floating. Joan pulled me close, arranging our bodies so we fit together perfectly, and I pressed my face against her neck, breathing in her scent. "I can't believe this is real," I murmured against her skin. "A month ago, I was just watching you from across a room, thinking you were impossibly out of reach. And now you're moving in with me," Joan replied with wonder. "Now you're my girlfriend, my partner, my everything." "Your everything?" "My everything," she confirmed, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. "Charlie, you've changed my entire life. You've made me understand what love is supposed to feel like." I lifted my head to look at her, seeing my own amazement reflected in her eyes. "You've done the same for me. You've made me brave enough to reach for what I want." "And what do you want?" Joan asked softly. "You," I said without hesitation. "Forever. A life together, a future together. Everything." "Then you'll have everything," Joan promised. "Because I want it too. All of it." We fell asleep planning our future, talking about the life we'd build together in hushed, reverent tones. Joan spoke of late-night conversations and lazy Sunday mornings, of supporting each other's dreams and creating new ones together. I shared my vision of coming home to her every day, of sharing meals and inside jokes and the kind of intimacy that comes from truly knowing another person. As sleep finally claimed me, I marveled at how completely my life had transformed. I'd gone from lonely observer to beloved girlfriend, from secret yearning to fulfilled love. Joan had taken my desperate want and transformed it into something beautiful, something real, something that promised to last. I could not stop wanting her, but now I didn't have to. Now she was mine, and I was hers, and the wanting had become having, the dreaming had become reality, and the love I'd carried secretly for so long was finally, gloriously, completely returned. In Joan's arms, I was home. And home, I realized, was not a place but a person, the person who saw you completely and chose to love you anyway, who made you brave enough to want everything and strong enough to believe you deserved it. Tomorrow, I would move my life into Joan's space, and we would begin the beautiful work of building something lasting together. Tonight, I would simply hold her and be held, marveling at the miracle of finding someone who wanted me exactly as I was, who loved me not despite my intensity, but because of it. I could not stop wanting her. I never wanted to stop wanting her. And now, wrapped in her arms with her promise of forever still warm on my lips, I knew I never would have to. This was love. This was home. This was everything I'd ever dreamed of and more than I'd ever dared to hope for. And it was just the beginning. As I drifted into sleep, Joan's breathing soft and steady beside me, I whispered one final confession into the darkness. I could not stop wanting her. And now I never have to. The end.